UFC Fight Night, San Diego, Marlon Vera versus Dominick Cruz. Welcome to your full card prediction video by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. He goes by Zahn, I go by Harris as usual. Fight by fight breakdown, fight by fight analysis from that betting perspective specifically. We want to let you know which fights are worth the value, which fights to avoid, which underdog has the best shot at winning, and some parlay action towards the end of the video as well. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks on YouTube. And of course, most importantly, we want to hear from you in the comments. For this UFC Fight Night San Diego, 13 fights. We have 7 of them on the prelims. We have 6 of them on the main card. We are going to analyze them in the order that they are currently presented in. More than likely, the order is subject to change. And what you'll notice is that we will update our description to put the fights in order, even if the timestamps are not necessarily in order. But nonetheless, let's get started with the prelims, with fight number 1. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to a couple of fights that were supposed to take place last week, but are now moved over to this week. And starting with fight number 1, we have Ariane Lipski versus Priscila Cachoeira. Because this fight was analyzed in our previous video, I won't spend too much time on this. I'll kind of get directly to my conclusion, my analysis of how this fight's going to go. And really what it comes down to, both of these ladies, somewhat similar in that they're pretty one-dimensional. They are strikers. They're both dangerous strikers. They both lack a ground game. They both lack some takedown defense. And they both have some cardio issues. But the thing is, though, is that I think Ariane Lipski is simply the more talented fighter. While the striking danger is present on both sides, I see Ariane Lipski's striking offers way more technique than Cachoeira's. I think both of them are going to gas out as the fight goes on. And unless either fighter hurts the other early in the fight, which definitely could happen, I expect Ariane Lipski to pull away as the fight goes on. Again, just as simply the more talented fighter, the more technical striker, the fighter that's a bit more capable and less reliant on brawling. So again, keeping it short, just because we did review this a little bit more in depth last week. But in terms of picking a winner, I'm going with Ariane Lipski.
Yeah, nothing changes on my end here with this pick here. I like Ariane Lipski here. I think I think she has good stand up. I think she's a cleaner striker, and she has some pop in her strikes, and she's gonna have the grappling advantage as well. Cardio holds up. I think Lipski gets this one done. So I'm gonna go Ariane Lipski here to get the win.
All right, second fight. We are going to take a look at Jason Witt versus Josh Quinlan. Again, this one was supposed to happen last week as well, so I won't spend too much time on it. Ultimately, for Josh Quinlan, we know that his last fight was a no contest. He got caught with some PEDs. That was only less than a year ago, right? He's 29 years old versus 35 years old in Jason Witt. He's in his athletic prime. You have to assume usually 28 to 32 is kind of that athletic prime age wise. And again, he's going up against an aged 35-year-old in Jason Witt, who just got knocked out pretty badly 6 months ago, right? So I can see why the odds are in favor on the side of Josh Quinlan, bringing over those odds over from last week, where Quinlan is about a 1.3, about a 1.4 in terms of being a favorite. This fight could be a little bit tricky, only in that we know that Jason Witt is going to have potentially the wrestling advantage. He's shown that wrestling IQ to game plan for it throughout the entire fight, and he does have 2 rounds worth of cardio in him at least. That could spell some trouble for Josh Quinlan, but I think there's a big discrepancy in the striking. I think Quinlan can hurt Jason Witt. I think that's where my thoughts are taking me when it comes to this fight in terms of what's actually going to happen. I think Quinlan can be smart enough to fight at range, explode when he needs to, use the striking advantage to catch Jason Witt. And we here on this channel, we make a big deal about weigh-ins, about ceremonial weigh-ins specifically. These two men were face to face last week when this fight was supposed to happen. Quinlan looked a lot bigger. Quinlan looked like he was gonna knock him out, simply put. So I feel a little bit better about Quinlan than I did even before or even at the beginning of last week. I feel better about him now than I did back then. I think the striking discrepancy is going to be too much. I think he's physically big. I think he will use range to his advantage and not allow Jason Witt to take him down. And I'm looking at Josh Quinlan to get the W here in his UFC debut.
Yeah, this is obviously a rebooked fight. The size was big for Quinlan at the weigh-in, but one thing we got to remember is Jason Witt against a lot of these fighters. He wins that first round. He comes out and he gets his wrestling going in that first round, and he gets some of it going second round. But a lot of times, some fighters can start stopping the takedowns. His cardio gets hit, and that's where they kind of start taking over the fight. Quinlan is a first round guy. He usually gets these guys out of there early. So it's a tough fight for me. I think this is one of the good underdog picks on the card is Jason Witt in terms of value because of his fighting style versus Quinlan. I could see Jason Witt laying on top for the first couple of rounds and Quinlan not really getting the chance to get going. But I think at some point Jason Witt's his cardio is gonna hit, and Quinlan has power. Jason Witt has a really bad chin, so I'm gonna expect. I'm gonna look for Quinlan to knock him out or get him out of there. But again, I'm not confident here with this guy here, Quinlan. He's only fought 5 or 6 fights, 5 fights, so you can't really trust this guy. And Jason Witt has fought far better guys than this guy. So this is Quinlan's. This is a big step up for Quinlan. Tapology has, I can't believe it's 88%. It's a hard pick for me, but I got to go with someone. So I'm going to go with Quinlan, but I'm not making any bets on this fight.
All right, so let's move on then to the third fight of the prelims. We have Youssef Zalal versus Damon Blackshear. For Zalal, it's been over a year since his last fight. He lost the split decision to Sean Woodson. That was back in June 2021. A lot of moving around in the stand-up, pretty busy in the stand-up, good combinations as well. Good striking IQ, stick and move type of style, has really good speed with that in and out movement. Definitely excels in fights that stays on the feet, but he does have the ability to land takedowns as well. We're looking at the takedown numbers there, 2.33 per fight. He's landed multiple takedowns in 4 of his 6 UFC fights. Takedown accuracy can be pretty ineffective at times, but the ability to land a takedown has shown to be there at this UFC level. Ultimately, still a very young fighter, so you got to think that he is going to improve immensely fight over fight, especially with as much time as he's taken off. He's taking on Damon Blackshear, who is a UFC newcomer on a 4-fight winning streak. Coming from Cage Fair UFC, he last competed back in May. From what I've seen from him in the CFFFC footage, patient in the stand-up, not too active, a bit wild in the striking at times, but he is a good grappler. 8 of his 12 wins are via submission. Pretty solid on the ground in general. He can land the takedowns too and stay on top. I'll be honest, I'm not with what I've seen from Blackshear. I'm not overly impressed with him. Again, I do think he's a good grappler, but I think he's a bit one-dimensional. Every fight that I've seen him in, the fights are a little bit on the sloppier side. You know, the grappling is 50-50 at times. I've seen him be worked in the stand-up too. With Youssef Zalal, this is a fighter who's coming in, or I should say, who was coming in as a super hot prospect in 2020, 3 consecutive wins, but then he went on a costly 3-fight losing streak, albeit to really good competition. You'd have to assume the time off was intentional and needed in terms to allow him to reset and kind of recalibrate and kind of just, readjust his focus. For this fight, I think Youssef Zalal can easily hang with the clinch, easily hang with the wrestling, easily hang with the grappling, the scrambling that Blackshear will offer. Again, as I mentioned, even though Damon Blackshear is good in that area, I've seen a lot of 50-50 moments in his fights, so it's not even to say he's dominant per se. So I do think Zalal can hang on the ground, whereas I don't think Blackshear will be able to handle Youssef Zalal's striking, Youssef Zalal's quickness, his constant movement. And really, I mean, simply put, Youssef Zalal needs a win at this point. And I think he gets it here. I think this is a good matchup for him. I think he gets the W. He has the UFC experience at this point, taking on a newcomer, and I think he checks more boxes. This fight is very close in terms of the odds. I don't know how I feel about that, but I do know that I am feeling Youssef Zalal to win this fight here.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. So one thing we got to remember is Youssef Zalal has been preparing for Christian Quinones, a good striker, boxer striker that was on the Contender Series. That fight was canceled, and they brought in Blackshear, so he's going to be on short notice, and Blackshear is going to want to grapple. So on short notice, it might be a little difficult. It's going to be a good fight. But as far as who I like in this spot, I got to go with Zalal. He lost to Woodson, Choi, and Taporia. Those are three great fighters. And when I look at Blackshear, Zalal has a stand-up advantage. Blackshear's going to want to use his grappling, but Zalal has grappling as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Zalal mixes in some takedowns. He's really good at mixing in his striking into takedowns, right? So I think Zalal's the better MMA fighter at this point. He needs a win. I feel when the UFC booked Zalal versus Quinones, I think Quinones was kind of the A side there. They were expecting him to look good in that fight to get a win against Zalal. Now that Quinones is out of there, they have to keep the card going. They brought in Blackshear, but I'm not sure Blackshear is the A side here. I just think he's a fill-in on short notice against Zalal. I think it's a tough fight, so I'm going to go Youssef Zalal. Just having a more well-rounded game here to get the win here.
All right, for fourth fight of our prelims, Ode Osbourne versus Tyson Nam. Ode Osbourne 2-fight winning streak. He beat Zaruk Adashev back in June. Very long reach. He's quick. He's explosive. He's a southpaw. Good boxing, good kickboxing as well. I like his accuracy. Doesn't really wind up too much on his punches. He stays pretty patient. Pretty crazy power as well. I like his combinations. Usually 2 or 3 punches at a time. He's well versed. He's a pretty diverse striker as well. Also has a wrestling background. He wrestled in college. Hasn't really shown it in the UFC. Just 1 takedown per fight. Obviously, small sample size in terms of not having too many UFC fights. But again, just hasn't really shown it a lot at this level. And some cautions about his cardio. Not that he'll be completely gassed, but as the fight progresses, not as fast, not as sharp. That's something that you want to pay attention to. You never want to see that if you're on the betting side for Ode Osbourne or for any fighter that kind of has those cardio issues where they slow down but they're not completely gassed. Tyson Nam, on the other hand, cardio stays pretty effective for the most part, although it's been over 18 months since his last fight. And that was a split decision loss back in January 2021. He is a striker, very technically sound, very consistent. The movement really isn't anything special. He will just kind of stay in front of you, but he is effective. He's good at controlling center. He's good at cutting the ring off, some fakes, some level changes, maybe too patient of a striker at times. But when he does let it go, the combinations are pretty solid. He's primarily a boxer, so expect a lot of hands, not too many kicks. And he has good power, especially in that right hand. We see his record there, 20 professional wins. 12 of them are via KO, TKO. So he definitely has that in him to be able to hurt his opponents. I think this is a really good fight here. Closer fight than the odds may make it seem. 2 guys that are going to want to show their striking. I think both guys are tough for me to say, but I think both guys are as dangerous as each other when it comes to their striking. We know that Tyson Nam definitely has the experience advantage. He's fought some really good quality fighters. I'm thinking, looking at his resume, Marlon Moraes, Jacques Zumagulov, Sergio Pettis, Kai Kara France, he's been in there with some really good opponents. The thing is, though, is that each of those were losses, right? So, experience advantage nonetheless, but it's not like he's coming on top in those fights versus good fighters. Ode Osbourne should be the better wrestler here. We're going to have to see if he actually uses it because, again, he hasn't really shown it in his time in the UFC. And, as I mentioned with Ode Osbourne, cardio could play a factor here. I think Tyson Nam, pretty consistent, from round 1 compared to round 3. Whereas Ode Osbourne, again, like I said, slows down a bit. I think that could be a key factor in the latter half of a round two or in a round three setting, where that extra round can really sway how this fight actually goes. But ultimately, I'm going to side with age here. Ode Osbourne, 8 years younger, has a 4-inch reach advantage. He's the more dynamic striker. He can resort to his wrestling. Tyson Nam, on the other hand, 18-month layoff, 38 years old. Don't know if that's going to be a good sign or a bad sign, but that usually is a bad sign in terms of how the fighter looks that much later at that age in this weight class on top of that. So I'm going to go Ode Osbourne here. I will say, careful in calling this a confident pick. Tyson Nam is capable, right? But I think Ode Osbourne should get the job done here, just as the more well-versed fighter, the more diverse fighter, and again, the slightly more dangerous striker.
Yeah, Ode is my pick. Ode Osbourne. I'm taking him to win this fight. I think Tyson Nam has a puncher's chance. That's what I'm giving him in this spot. I just believe Ode is going to be the better striker in this fight, the better wrestler, the better grappler, the bigger guy at 125 pounds. Ode is a different fighter than 135. At 125, he's still big. He looks like he's at 135. He's much bigger than these guys. Tyson Nam is a big flyweight as well, so the size might not be that big in this fight. But I like Ode's reflexes, his speed. That's one thing I like about him in this spot. And as far as the cardio goes, Nam probably has better cardio, but he keeps his pace isn't that he doesn't have a high pace style. So I can see Ode's cardio keeping up here because it's not going to be a high paced fight. And Ode went through Vergara, CJ Vergara. I'm high on that guy. I think that's a more dangerous fighter than Tyson Nam right now. And it was a close fight. Could have went either way. It went Ode's way. But he went through that. I believe that was a 3-round fight. And I think Ode gets this one done here, man. I think there's only a puncher's chance for Tyson in this one, in this spot. I think Ode is the better striker, has the reach. He's going to be the stronger guy in this fight as well. I think, and if you look at the Manel Cop fight, he was looking good until the flying knee. So he was winning that fight until that one strike. So I don't think Nam has that flying knee in him. So I'm going to go Ode to get the win here.
All right, so let's then move on to fight number 5 of our prelims. Gabriel Benítez taking on Charlie Ontiveros. For Gabriel Benítez, 2-fight losing streak. He lost to David Onama in February. We will be touching on David Onama later on in this video. Benítez, southpaw, good quick jab, decent lateral movement. The hands are pretty sharp. Mixes his strikes up pretty well. That back leg, dangerous weapon for him. He has really hard calf kicks. Has some pop in his hands as well. He's a diverse striker. He, like I said, mixes it up pretty well. Doesn't really seem to have that extra gear in him, though, especially when he's facing pressure from his opponent. And expect him to keep the fight on the feet. I mean, you see the takedown numbers there, very minimal. Charlie Ontiveros, also on a 2-fight losing streak. He hasn't competed since October 2021. He lost to Steve Garcia at that time. Southpaw on the feet as well, switch stance fighter as well. Taekwondo style in the stand-up. So he's going to be light and bouncy on the feet. He's going to have good striking speed. He's going to be super explosive. He's going to fight super tall. Not only, does he have the physical height and reach advantages, but he also fights very tall in addition to that. But again, he's going to have, 7 inches in height, 7 inches in reach. So definitely some significant advantages for him. Like I said, super explosive, good power at this weight, like we saw in his last fight. Horrible takedown defense. Doesn't really seem to have a ground game at all. Again, that might not matter in this, but what could matter is that he does have some IQ issues in general. I would say stay away from this fight completely. That's the very first thing I'm going to say. I think this is a horrible fight from a betting perspective. I think these are 2 very unreliable guys. Gabriel Benítez has a questionable chin. He has a number of losses. I mean, first of all, double-digit losses at 11, but a number of those are via KO TKO, including his last 2 fights where he's on a 2-fight losing streak. So I wouldn't be surprised if Charlie Ontiveros can capitalize on that, can knock him out. Again, Ontiveros has the power and the explosiveness to be able to do that. He has a 7-inch reach advantage to be able to do that. He has the height advantage to be able to do that. But I think Gabriel Benítez has a huge experience advantage here. And, you know, I think he's cleaner technically with his striking. I think he's crafty with that striking diversity. And I think at some point, although Ontiveros's, let's call it somewhat awkward movement, I think it'll pose some problems for Benítez maybe in the first minute or two. But I think Benítez will be able to get a read on that, and essentially, you know, close the distance effectively, be able to implement that very diverse striking effectively, possibly catch Ontiveros here, but just in general, overwhelm him a little bit in terms of the technique advantage, the striking rate advantage as well that Benítez should have in this fight. So I'm looking at him to be better on the feet, eventually close the distance, eventually figure out Ontiveros' timing, and then from there, he's the more talented fighter. So Gabriel Benítez should get the job done. But again, I want to stay completely away from this one because minus 340 for a fighter with a suspect chin with double-digit losses, I just can't do it. And I can't do the underdog either in Charlie Ontiveros because I don't think he's UFC level at all. So again, my pick, Gabriel Benítez. My advice: stay away from this from a betting perspective.
Yeah, this could be a good fight though. If you really think about it, both these guys gonna stand and bang here. I had to do a lot of watching on this Ontiveros guy. He landed some good strikes on Holland. So he's dangerous. He has that what is it? Taekwondo. Is it Taekwondo this guy's doing?
Yep, Taekwondo.
Does it say there? He's doing Taekwondo?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, this guy, he has good Taekwondo, man. And this guy definitely can land a big strike to finish this fight. Mowgli is getting older, right? So Benítez is getting older. And that reach is huge, man. If that reach is a big deal, right? So you got to really be careful when it comes to this fight. But when I did all the footage here, I did all the watching on both the guys here. I watched 6 fights of Ontiveros. I watched 10 fights of Benítez, and Benítez gets this done, man. Even though he's old, he should get it done because the thing about Ontiveros is he's a fragile guy, man. Like he has 8 losses. How many of those are knockouts? Because every time I seen him lose, the ref was stepping in and the ref was stopping the fights, right? So verbal submission, ground and pound, knockout, knees to the body, ground and pound, doctor stoppage. Yeah, this every single loss I seen, this guy was getting like folded like a lawn chair, right? So Benítez throws heavy hands. Again, I agree with Harris. You can't really bank on Benítez at such a high favorite, but I get why the odds are like this. I think if Benítez throws one heavy strike, Ontiveros could just collapse like a Jenga game, right? So I'm gonna go Benítez here to get it done here. Just being the more durable guy. He's a lot shorter, but I think he's gonna be able to at least land at some point in this fight, hurt Ontiveros, and get the fight stopped.
All right, so let's move on to fight number 6 of our prelims. We have Martin Buday versus Łukasz Brzeski. Brzeski, UFC newcomer. He competed in Dana White Contender Series back in September. He won that fight, but it was changed to a no contest because he was caught with a PED. Bit of a smaller heavyweight. He comes in around 235, 240 pounds. Pretty comfortable on the feet, but he does lack some striking technique. He can swing big. He can miss big at times. He throws that kick with some regularity. But I mean, for what it's worth, just relatively basic fighter, right? Basic 2-punch combination, good pop in his punches, good pace early in the fight. I don't think he's a takedown artist by any means, but he does have an active ground and pound. And I mean, again, like many heavyweights, cardio is a huge concern. You know, he slows down significantly as the fight goes on. For Martin Buday, on the other hand, he beat Chris Barnett. That was back in April. He's on a 9-fight win streak now at this point. Big fighter. I mean, he cuts down to 265 pounds. Decent stand-up. You know, he looks like he's in control. He's pretty tight with the hands. Technically sound for the most part. decent clinch slash dirty boxing tactic, almost that Holly Holm style. And that's something that he pretty much implements in all of his fights, right? He fights coming forward. He closes that distance pretty effectively. He's in good control. He looks to use that clinch, dirty boxing tactic. He's heavy. He keeps his weight on you. And I think that's going to be a key theme for this fight. Ultimately, low level fight as well as a heavyweight beware. So from that perspective, really anything can happen. But the way that I'm looking at this, Martin Buday, bigger guy, heavier guy, use the weight advantage to implement that dirty boxing tactic, like I mentioned. Keep the fight on the cage. I think he has an effective game plan. It's something that I've seen him do very often throughout this 9 fight win streak. And again, I think it's what allowed him to be on this 9 fight win streak. And he's facing a fighter who he's just simply bigger than. And I believe that he will successfully be able to implement that style and continue on to win number 10 in a row. So Martin Buday is going to be my pick, but again, a lot of caution on this one. Low level fight, in my opinion. Heavyweight beware, in my opinion. Potentially a parlay piece, but with some caution, with some red flags. Martin Buday is going to be my pick.
Yeah, I'm with Martin Buday here, man. I think Lucas needs to get this to the mat. And Buday, it looks like he's tough, man. He's from Slovakia, so he does have some wrestling, but he does have some wrestling in his game here. He's the better striker in this fight. I think anyone that's smaller than Buday by at least 20 pounds, he's going to implement that holding you against the cage style. And he's very effective because he's landing a lot. It's the refs can break it up and he'll put you right back in that same spot. So I think it's kind of like a cheat code. It's like a video game move. If you keep doing something that keeps winning and you just keep spamming that move and then you win the fight. I think that's how this fight's going to go. I think Buday is just going to keep holding him against the cage. And it's going to be a bad fight. But I think Buday gets this one done here. Unanimous decision.
All right, final fight of our prelims: Angela Hill versus Lupi Godinez. Angela Hill lost to Verna Jandiroba. That was back in May. She's on a 3 fight losing streak now. We know she's good on the feet. We know she has good speed, good continuous movement, quick feet. She moves well pretty laterally. A lot of fakes and feints to set up her attack. I like that she throws punches in combinations. It's usually more than one at a time. We know she has a really effective clinch. We know she's a Muay Thai North American champion, so has that legitimate credentials behind her name as well. Good ability to get up if she's taken down. Good takedown defense in general, 76%. Interesting to note, Verna Jandiroba was able to get her down 3 times in that last fight. That is relevant for this fight going up against Lupi Godinez. And before I sort of expand on Lupi Godinez, last point I'll make about Angela Hill is that we know she has really good cardio, and that's going to be an important factor for her. Lupi Godinez is on a 2 fight winning streak after a unanimous decision win versus Ariane Cornellosi back in May. Pretty good overall fighter. I mean, she has some boxing skills. She has good movement, good in and out, good accuracy on the punches as well. She throws good combinations too. But we know her MO is that wrestling, good wrestling skills, good takedown defense. She's willing to stay committed to those takedown attempts as well. That could definitely put her in favorable clinch positions with cage control if she's not actually landing the takedown in and of itself. But from what we've seen from her, I mean, again, small sample size in that she hasn't had many fights in the UFC, but over 5 takedowns per fight, or per 15 minutes, I should say, 46% accuracy. We definitely know that it's something that she can and will resort to successfully. With Angela Hill, I mean, ultimately she can't catch a break, right? I mean, we know that she's always in the close fight. We know that she's been robbed, in my opinion, at least a number of times in these close fights. And she continues to take on very tough opponents. We know that she's always game. We know that she's going to find herself, or that she has been finding herself on the losing side. And ultimately, she's been finding herself on the losing side because she's been finding herself in bad matchups. In my opinion, this is another bad matchup for her. I think Angela Hill, of course, will have the huge experience advantage here, but I don't think that experience advantage will matter in this fight. I do think her striking and her movement can cause Godinez some problems, But, we kind of saw it in the Jandiroba fight. I don't know if it's Angela Hill is maybe in her own head or she's not who she used to be, but that striking discrepancy might not be there as much as we think. Um, Lupi has a style where she can push the pace, where she has boxing of her own, where she can be effective on the feet in her own right, and more importantly, where she can close distance. She get into that takedown, and I think she'll find her spots eventually. I think that Angela Hill will find herself on the mat a few times in this fight as Godinez gets herself a unanimous decision win. I think Lupi Godinez has good entries, good takedown ability, and then again, like I said, with the striking, we know Angela Hill's high level, but Lupi Godinez capable will match her at times for sure. So I think this discrepancy on the feet won't be as much as we think. I think the discrepancy on the ground will be largely in favor for Lupi Godinez. So I like her in this spot. I think Lupi Godinez is going to get it done. And unfortunately, another loss for Angela Hill.
Yeah, man. This is a good fight. I will say that I like this fight because Angela Hill's a vet, man, and she has that striking advantage. But what does it matter if she can't knock out Godinez? Because Angela Hill, as good as a striker she doesn't have that power to really put Godinez down or to keep her honest in this fight. Because Godinez has okay striking. If it was out of 10, I would say I'll give Angela Hill, let's say 7.5 in terms of striking. I would give Godinez a 6.5. So she's not that far behind. But as Harris indicated, that grappling is big. I would literally I think Godinez has a sizable advantage with the grappling, especially the wrestling. It's in her pedigree, right? It's in her genetics. She has two younger sisters, Carla and Anna Godinez. These are big time wrestlers on the Canadian national team. I'm not sure which one, but one of them is really, 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 really good. I forgot which one of the sisters that is, but it's in the genetics, man. She's gonna take down Angela Hill. She can do it over 3 rounds and not gas out. Angela Hill's gonna have a tough time in this spot. I think Godinez gets not easy, but I think she gets a clear win. I think just stylistically, Angela Hill's a great fighter. She has losses that she should have won, but stylistically, I think Lupi Godinez is a nightmare for Angela Hill right now. So I'm gonna go Lupi Godinez, get that wrestling going, do it for 3 rounds, and get this win.
Moving on to our main card, first fight, we have Bruno Silva versus Gerald Meerschaert. For Bruno Silva, clearly the wrong image being used by ESPN, but nonetheless, Bruno Silva lost to Alex Pereira back in March. He's a striker, switch stance fighter. He has that stalking style. I expect him to control center. I expect him to put forward pressure on as well. Pretty diversified and dynamic in his striking approach. He's looking to land big, powerful strikes. He swings somewhat wildly with the hands, but the kicks stay pretty controlled. They stay pretty crisp. He has good takedowns, although he hasn't really shown it in the UFC much. Less than a takedown per fight in 4 UFC fights. Just 2 takedowns landed in 4 UFC fights, and both of those occurred in his last fight. But outside of the UFC, I've seen really good ground and pound from him. And his last fight could be a sign of things to come, or maybe not. Maybe he might not want to do that going up against Gerald Meerschaert, who we know is going to be kind of a grappling specialist. Gerald Meerschaert, he lost his last fight to Krzysztof Jotko back in April via unanimous decision. He's a relatively basic fighter, at least with his stand-up, basic 1-2 combinations out of that southpaw stance, below average in the striking department, I'd say. He leaves his chin up, he can get clipped. Ultimately he's going to use as much stand-up as he needs to try to get him close, to try to land that takedown. We see he has the takedown numbers there to support it. Over 2 takedowns per 15 minutes, over 40% on the accuracy side of things. So, he finds a way to get it done. He has a decent clinch. He has a good, reliable guillotine, very reliable submissions in general. 26 of his 34 wins are via submission. So that's very important to note. And again, if you're not careful, he can take you down. what's interesting here is that, Meerschaert had some issues landing takedowns in his last fight. I mean, the reason for that was the agility and the movement of Krzysztof Jotko. Meerschaert did land one takedown, but he didn't really do anything with it. Meerschaert also gave up 4 takedowns in that fight. I think it's really important to note that that result to me is super relevant in this fight for a few reasons. I think Bruno Silva probably not as committed to the constant movement the way that Krzysztof Jotko is, but I think the agility and the movement is there. Krzysztof Jotko was piecing up Meerschaert on the feet. I believe that Silva is more dangerous than what Jotko was, so I think Silva should be able to do the same thing. I also believe Bruno Silva will be able to land the takedown when he wants to, again, the way that Krzysztof Jotko was able to do with 4 takedowns landed in Gerald Meerschaert's last fight. And I believe that, again, Silva is more than good enough of a grappler to not put himself in danger or to get caught by something unexpected. Ultimately, I am Bruno Silva all day on this one. I think Gerald Meerschaert is very beatable, and Bruno Silva might get a knockout win here. But if he doesn't, I still like him to get the win in general. Bruno Silva is going to be my pick.
Yeah, I think it's a clear win for Bruno Silva. He's going to run through this guy. Gerald Meerschaert is kind of like, to me, the middleweight Paul Craig. These guys, they're losing fights, or they're fighting guys that don't have the grappling as much as them, and then they're losing fights, and then they catch them, or they just somehow start winning at the end of the fight, right? These guys have that heart. They come back. They're always losing, and then they somehow win. They both have that similar tendency here. In this fight, I think Silva's going to have the better stand-up. I think still Silva has good enough jiu-jitsu here. He might be the better grappler as well, or it's close. So I think Silva gets this one done. I think he's going to be too heavy of a striker. I think he knocks out Meerschaert at some point in this fight, runs this guy over, gets the win.
Second fight of our main card, Cynthia Calvillo versus Nina Nunes. Calvillo lost to Andrea Lee back in November. 3-fight losing streak at this point. Decently reliable in the stand-up. She does have good head movement. Expect her to fight coming forward. Expect some regular activity out of her as well. She is able to pick up the pace when needed. Surprisingly good strength for this flyweight division. And she does have that neutralizer, of course, which is the wrestling. Not overwhelming by any means, but pretty respectable, right? Almost 2 takedowns per fight, over 40% on the accuracy side of things, and you mix that up with some pretty good grappling as well. We even see almost 1 submission average attempted per fight. So again, just showing that grappling prowess, having that equalizer, which is the wrestling, just a decent overall fighter in Cynthia Calvillo. And she's taking on Nina Nunes, who hasn't competed in over a year. She lost to Mackenzie Dern in April 2021. She's introduced as a striker. She has, she's a solid counterpuncher. She fights from the outside, has a decent striking in general, but her striking kind of reminds me a bit Cowboy Cerrone-ish, right? In that it's decent, but it's not overwhelming, right? A good amount of fakes and feints, but there's not a lot of activity at times. She also doesn't have the best takedown defense. You look at her last 2 fights, her opponents have been able to expose that and specifically won those fights by just taking it to the ground over and over again. This fight was supposed to happen last month, but it was canceled prior to the event. I think Nina Nunes had an illness for that one. Not exactly sure of the details there. Also important to note that Nina Nunes is moving up to 125 for this fight. Also important to note that Cynthia Calvillo, I mean, she's been beaten up pretty badly in her last 2 fights, so it kind of makes you question her toughness and her heart lately. But I don't think Nina Nunes coming up in weight, along with the style that she presents, can do that same type of damage as Cynthia Calvillo has faced in her last 2 fights. Cynthia Calvillo also took quite a bit of time off, right? I mean, November 2021 was when she lost to Andrea Lee. It's been almost a year, close to a year since that last fight. So that time off definitely, should serve her well. Ultimately, I think Cynthia Calvillo, a bit more solid all around, without that threat coming back on the side of Nina Nunes to hurt her. I think Calvillo can resort to takedowns when she wants to, which I assume, will be with what I assume will be a strength advantage for her, in addition to the bad takedown defense from Nina Nunes. And I also consider that hunger factor, right? After 3 losses in a row, after being a fighter that was 9-1, 3 losses in a row, Cynthia Calvillo's got to keep her name relevant. And I think Nina Nunes is the perfect opponent to allow her to bring her name back to relevancy. So I like Cynthia Calvillo here. I think she's just the better fighter overall. And I don't think Nina Nunes is dangerous. Cynthia Calvillo is going to be my pick.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, this is a good fight because obviously we've seen that Calvillo's on a losing streak. We also look at Nina Nunes. She hasn't won in a while either. She hasn't won since 2018, and she's a mom now, right? So it's a lot different now. And when you look at the Amanda Nunes fight, the first fight versus Pena, Amanda obviously was off, like she was off. And then the second fight, even though she won, as a big fan of Amanda Nunes, I thought she, even though she won, I don't think she was that same killer that I remember, right? So I think she lost a little bit. Again, she's still the best, but I think she lost a little bit. She's slowing down a little, and it might be just because her and Nina Nunes, right? Like they have that kid now, so they're not doing as much training. A lot more Netflix and chill with these guys. So you saw with Amanda, she didn't really look as great as she's looked before. New kids in their life, man. Nina Nunes is the mom in this situation, so she's more involved. She probably does more work. I don't think she's training as much as she used to, right? She's not fighting as often. She fought Mackenzie Dern, 2021, 2019, Tatiana Suarez, a year before that, Claudia Gadelia. So she's definitely not full time right now. And I think right now, Cynthia needs a win. I think Cynthia needs a win, and she's gonna be hungry for it. She has an easier fighter than what she's used to. Um, I think she has more at this point. So they're both old, but I'm gonna go with Cynthia Calvillo because at one point, um, she was supposed to be something, right? She was supposed to be a contender. She obviously fell off, but I think she gets back on here and gets the win against Nina Nunes.
Let's move on to the third fight of our main card. We have Devin Clark versus Azamat Murzakanov. Devin Clark beat William Knight back in April. That was a heavyweight fight. He has that wrestling, grappling, clinch approach to his game. He's a specialist there. Getting a bit better on the feet as well, a bit more patient, a bit more technique, a bit more tactics behind his striking. The jab isn't bad. The low kick is kind of sneaky. But, for the most part, he's going to use his stand up in a way where he's obviously trying to land that takedown or put you in a clinch situation. Explosive shoots for takedowns. That's his primary game plan, and he stays committed to his attempts. The numbers support it as well, right? Right around 2.5 takedowns per fight, and has that toughness, has that good survival instinct with his wrestling as well. It's kind of tough to get him out of there. For Azamat Murzakanov, he beat Tafon Nchukwi back in March. Still an undefeated fighter at this point, 11-0. He's a southpaw. He's light on the feet. He has a lot of in and out movement. Uses the fakes and feints to set up counters. That said, much more of a counter puncher than he is an active puncher or a puncher who kind of sets the pace or punches first. That could be a problem. I'm not the biggest fan of fighters who are strictly counter punchers, and he's kind of on that side. He uses that overhand left hook a lot, drops guys with his power. 8 of his 11 wins are via KO, TKO. Being Russian, you got to assume some wrestling is there at the very least, but it's something that I've only seen from him when he has his opponents hurt, right? He definitely wants to keep the fight standing. Interesting, again, to note Devin Clark participated at heavyweight in his last fight. This one is back to light heavyweight. And honestly, I think Devin Clark is pretty live here. Murzakanov, we expect him to be the better striker. He is faster on the feet. He is more diverse in his striking. He is more dangerous with the striking. But we have to say that Clark is a better wrestler based on what we've seen, right? Essentially, to confidently side with Murzakanov, you have to assume that being Russian means that his wrestling is at least good enough to not allow Devin Clark to lay and pray for 3 rounds. Although I can't call it a confident pick because I haven't seen any proof of the wrestling, I'm going to make that assumption that Azamat Murzakanov has at least enough to be able to keep it on the feet. And as he keeps it on the feet, he should, you almost expect him to be able to outstrike Devin Clark here, and get the win on the feet. Can't say he's going to knock him out per se, but potentially has that ability to do so. Not a confident pick at all. I actually want to stay away from this completely. I'm not interested in putting this on any parlays because Devin Clark is definitely that type of fighter who will burst your parlay, who will get it done as an underdog. But in terms of making a pick, I'm going to go with Azamat Murzakanov.
Seeing this spot, Devin Clark, you got to recognize that wrestling, and if he can get some takedowns, he can attack Azamat's cardio. Azamat does slow down as the fight goes on, and if Clark can get this fight to the mat early in this fight, he can give Azamat an issue here, attacking that cardio, right? So we got to respect him in that light here. He does have a path to win this fight. But I think Azamat has some wrestling. I think he's going to be able to keep this on the feet. I think he's a strong guy, man. I think he's going to be able to eventually get the knockout with his striking. He's never been knocked out. He took some hits against in his last fight. He's shown that he has power late in his fight against Stefan Nakuchi, whatever that is. But in this fight, it's a completely different fight because he needs to stop the takedowns. I think he can. And eventually, I think Azamat's going to find that shot here. Clark's been finished. He's been knocked out. He's been wobbled in fights. A lot of his fights, he's been wobbled. I like Azamat here to test the chin here and get the win.
Fight number 4 of our main card, Yasmin Jarugri versus Jasmine Lucindo. For Jarugri, undefeated Mexican newcomer. She hasn't competed since August of last year, though. She competed primarily in Combate. 6 of her 8 wins are via KO TKO, so that's going to give you an idea as to her style. I like her on the feet. Her stance looks a little Brandon Moreno-like, in terms of influence, not in terms of level, but just in terms of influence. I wonder if there is some influence there, being Mexican, of course, but nonetheless, good kickboxing. The boxing is decent. I've seen some solid combinations out of her. I've seen quick hands within those combinations as well. Decent technique, decent overall movement. Kind of fights from the outside. She is light on her feet as well. Gets in and out of distance pretty well. Takedown defense is lacking a bit from what I've seen. And of course, the power is there. Like I mentioned, 6 of her 8 wins via KO TKO. She can be very explosive. She can be very aggressive, and she can put the pressure on, which has obviously led to a bunch of stoppages for her. And still very young, just 22 years old. So that tells you that, she can look a lot different. She can improve a lot fight over fight. So going to be very curious to see how she looks in her UFC debut. For Jasmine Lucindo, on the other hand, UFC newcomer as well. She's not undefeated, but she is on a 7-fight winning streak. Last competed in April. Also a very young fighter. She's just 20 years old. So it looks like UFC is trying to find someone here between these 2 straw weights. She's light on the feet. She's a decent striker, decent 2-punch combinations. She looks to do most of her work from the outside, but she is a bit limited as a striker. Looks like she can land a takedown. More importantly, it looks like she commits to it. Bit of that chain wrestling approach type of game. Almost uses that fighting from the outside technique to get her opponents to commit so that she can look for those takedowns. She can look to shoot in, to kind of catch you off guard, to catch you in a moment where you think that you have the one up. She has decent top control. She's a good grappler to go along with that. Good IQ on the ground, good positional improvements on the ground. Just 2 wins via submission, which I thought was a little bit surprising based on the type of grappling that I've seen from her. So it tells you that, for what she has, maybe she's not the biggest submission threat. But nonetheless, striker versus grappler is the way that I'm seeing this fight. Jarugri being the striker, Lucindo being the grappler. You always have to think about how good is the grappler at landing takedowns. In my opinion, Jasmine Lucindo as the grappler, she can land takedowns. And Jarugri, like I said, she might have some questionable takedown defense, but you never really know, right? Because they've competed in different promotions. You don't know what their skill set translates to in terms of the UFC level. I do think Jarugri is much better on the feet, more diverse, more dangerous. But I want to side with the grappler here. I think Lucindo's striking is good enough to allow her to find takedowns. I think that she can commit to a ground game. I think she has the grappling, the top control to go along with it. I think Jarugri will have good moments, but I think it'll be a frustrating fight for her and potentially for bettors that are siding with her. If nothing else, avoid this fight completely from a betting perspective. If nothing else, potentially dog or pass. I can understand why Jarugri is the favorite as the better striker, as the more explosive striker. She is Mexican. UFC loves that fan base. But Jasmine Lucindo, the grappler who can land takedowns, I think will find her way to a decision victory. So Jasmine Lucindo as the underdog is going to be my pick.
Yeah, this is a good fight, and it's funny that these fighters didn't have to go through the contender series route. They just went right to the UFC, which I think they should do with a lot of these guys. Some of these guys are really high level, and they put them on the contender series. Why are they there? Just put them straight into the UFC like this, right? Because these are two good prospects, two good fighters. Like Harris said, this is gonna be grappler versus striker. And I'm going with the striker here. I like Yasmin in this spot. I think she's a dangerous striker. I think she's vicious, man. I think she has that kill, and she keeps going as the fight goes. Right, she doesn't slow down with that, trying to finish the fights. And when it comes to striking, she's way better. I think she has some grappling in her, some jujitsu here to defend some of Lucindo. But the bigger thing for me in this fight is when I look at Lucindo's. First of all, the eye test tells me Yasmin gets this done. But then when I look at the competition, Lucindo has fought. It's super low level. Um, yeah, look at this, man. 8-3. Okay, 1-2, 2-1, 0-0. She's only 20. She lost in 2019, so 3 years ago. She was 17, so she started really early. So she's a game fighter, man. She was brought up well. But again, she hasn't fought anyone, right? And when you look at Yasmin definitely has fought in the better fighters. Has fought in Combate, which is a decent feeder league for the UFC. And yeah, like this girl has fought in experienced fighters. Girl fought 15 fights. Another girl fought 15 fights. Another girl fought 9 fights. 6-3, 5-0. So 6-3. So I like Yasmin in this spot. I think she's gonna be able to, even if she gets taken down in the first round. I think as the fight goes on, the takedowns won't be there, and Yasmin's gonna be vicious in the stand up. So I'm gonna go Yasmin here to get the win.
All right, let's move on to our co-main event as it currently stands. We have Nate Landwehr versus David Onama. David Onama, 2-fight winning streak. He beat Garrett Armfield just last month, so looking to get right back in there. Southpaw switch stance fighter, solid striking IQ, solid striking technique as well. Quick, sharp striking. He has a good jab. He has good 1-2s. Powerful striking. He can definitely be explosive. Clean, powerful, and explosive striking. Like I mentioned, he has 3 rounds worth of cardio as well, which is really important. And probably more important than that, he trains with James Krause. So, he has a knowledgeable ear coaching him, and he has good wrestling to show for it. We saw some of that chain wrestling in his last fight, and just the overall ability to scramble and to get back up if he's taken down. Solid grappling as well. Just proving to be pretty good all around. Unproven in a lot of ways, but showing that he has the overall skill set to be pretty effective no matter where he is. Nate Landwehr, on the other hand, he beat Ludovic Klein back in October. Solid stalking style of stand-up. He, somewhat decent boxing, decent counter puncher, decent movement in and out of striking range. Definitely use some better striking defense. Doesn't move the head much, but he does have high activity. And he has some wrestling, good scrambling if he's taken down. Nate Landwehr, we know he's always game. He's tough. There's no guaranteed win when you're facing Nate Landwehr. I mean, we saw what happened in that Ludovic Klein fight. We thought, or I thought, I'll speak for myself, I thought Ludovic Klein was going to get that W relatively easily, and Nate Landwehr ended up pulling it out. But I do think that Nate Landwehr is, outmatched pretty much everywhere here. I think Onama is the better striker, the more dangerous striker. 2 inches in height on paper. I wonder how that translates in the actual fight. A few inches in terms of his reach advantage as well. David Onama might also be the better wrestler, or at least prove to be the physically stronger of the two in order to allow himself to land the takedowns. And I'm satisfied enough with Onama's IQ, with his chin, with his toughness, and with his cardio to be able to pull through and to not make any costly mistakes. So David Onama, I feel pretty comfortable here. Landwehr is game, but Landwehr should be outmatched pretty much everywhere here. David Onama is going to be my pick.
Yeah, I see fight of the night all over this one. This could be a war. I'm going with David Onama here to land the bigger bombs, the harder shots, eventually getting a finisher. These guys don't have the best striking defense, so this is going to be an exciting fight. If anyone goes for the takedown, I think David Onama would get it. David Onama has good takedown defense, so you might be able to dictate where the fight goes. But having that power, that athleticism, I think Onama gets this one done in this spot.
All right, so let's move on to our main event of the evening. Really good, interesting fight in this bantamweight division. We have Marlon Vera taking on Dominick Cruz. Marlon Vera, we know, beat Rob Font back in April, 3-fight winning streak now. He's a southpaw, switch stance fighter, pretty relaxed in the stand-up. He'll also throw a fair amount of kicks. Those kicks have been a very good weapon for him, especially in his last several fights at this point. Good jab, good counter puncher, good tie clinch. Look for good activity in the clinch, the elbows, the knees, things like that. He likes to put forward pressure on you while staying patient at the same time in his setup. And I mean, we can't forget that he is a grappler. He's considered a grappler, right? Almost a takedown per fight. We know he can grapple, whether it's, fighting off a takedown or whether it's an effective defensive guard or whether it's submission attempts. Just in general, he's a high IQ fighter that has a lot of toughness. His cardio holds up. Definitely one of the best in the division, or at least has proven to be over his last couple of fights. But he's going up against Dominick Cruz, who's on a 2-fight winning streak. Beat Pedro Munoz back in December, has that great movement that we know him to have. Can keep it up for the entire fight. Movement is going to be awkward. It's going to give a lot of fighters problems. Active, diverse striker, throws some very weird angles, weird, unexpected combinations that somehow work. And we know the kind of wrestling that he has. It's very high IQ, 3 takedowns a fight almost, over 40% on the accuracy side of things. Just a sound overall fighter, of course, in Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz, I mean, over his last 2 fights, I mean, he's kind of proven that he still has it at this level, right? Marlon Vera, on the other hand, he's been on fire. He's looked really impressive, and he's kind of propelled his name to the top of this division. To make a pick for this fight, I think you have to assess, or I think you have to think about how you think the fight will go. I think Cruz can and will land a takedown or two versus Marlon Vera. Marlon Vera has just 68% takedown defense, so definitely opens the door for Cruz to land a few takedowns. I do think that Vera will be very solid with his striking, with that forward pressure. We know that both fighters have shown, good poise, good cardio for 5-round settings as well. But of course, Dominick Cruz has a lot more experience in that department. We can't forget that Dom Cruz, I mean, he's only lost to the best of the best, right? 24 wins, 3 losses, and those 3 losses are like legends, if I'm not mistaken. Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, I should say, not Dillashaw, and Uriah Faber way back in '07, right? So just 3 losses to his name. Faber, legend, Garbrandt, the champ at the time, Cejudo, some call him the best in the division. These are the only people that he's lost to, right? So we can't forget that Dom Cruz legitimately has been able to effectively implement his style really against everyone else, right? He's been able to stop the effectiveness of all of his other opponents. And because of how he's looked over the last 2 fights, in my opinion, I think he's showing that he can still do this. I believe that his movement and just the way that his striking is very awkward. I think it could be a bit too much for Marlon Vera. Again, the takedowns, though I don't think will be too effective in terms of maybe hurting or doing a lot of damage. I think it'll be a further tactic that's used by Dom Cruz to swing some close rounds in his favor. Obviously, a very close fight. I think a fight that will be very back and forth. But again, I'm trying to envision how I think the fight will go. I can see 48-47 across the board. I can see maybe even one judge giving it 49-46 for Dom Cruz. Company man, close rounds, a takedown or two. This could potentially get Dom Cruz a title shot for all we know. I like the dog in this situation. Again, I think Marlon Vera is very good, but Dom Cruz has a style that might be a little bit too tricky for him. And Dom Cruz has proven that tricky style is something that he can keep up for 5 rounds and be effective for 5 rounds. So I like Dominick Cruz in this spot, going with the underdog for this main event. And I'll be very curious to see what the UFC does with Dominick Cruz if he wins this one here. But Dominick Cruz is going to be my pick for this main event.
All right, let's go, man. This is a crazy fight. Let's be honest, man. Marlon Vera should get this done. Like, he should win this fight. Marlon Vera should get it done. So I don't want to sway anyone's picks as far as anyone listening. Marlon Vera is a dangerous guy. As the fight goes on, this guy doesn't slow down, and he eventually connects and he knocks you out. So definitely, I'm gonna say, for me, I'm not gonna make a bet on this one. But as far as everyone's picking this one, everyone watching, if you watch UFC, you kind of know who Dom Cruz is, you know who Marlon Vera is, so you should already have a decision on this one. I think this fight is closer than what Tapology is saying. I think it's closer than what common sense is saying. Common sense says that Marlon Vera goes in there and just crushes this guy as the fight goes on, and I'm on that side where I think that could happen, and it likely does. But as a capper on these fights, you got to look at other things. And when you look at Marlon Vera fighting Frankie Edgar, Frankie Edgar was able to win 2 minutes and 2 rounds and 2 rounds and a half, or what? I don't remember when he got knocked out in that 3rd round. But Frankie Edgar was up on two of the judges' scorecards at that point in that fight versus Marlon Vera. So if he can get 2 rounds and a half out of this guy, you got to think Dom Cruz has the ability to do the same, right? And Dom Cruz has elusive striking. He moves out of the way, in and out. He has that takedown threat. Again, this is a tough fight because I know Marlon Vera is probably just going to crush him. But for the channel, I'm going to make a pick. I'm not going to make a bet. I'm going to go with Dominick Cruz. I just think that he's a vet. He knows what he's getting into. He's a smart guy. One of the highest IQs next to Cejudo, in my opinion, in terms of smart fighters. And I just think that he's going to come with the right game plan here. Keep Marlon Vera off balance here. Use some takedowns. I think he's going to be able to get 3 rounds. And again, he has that when it comes to the judges like the vets. The judges like the legends, right? So he might get a little respect if one of the 2 rounds are close. So I'm going to go with Dom Cruz as well. But again, I don't want anyone to feel like this is something I'm going to go make a bet on. So I wouldn't suggest you do that as well, because I get why he's an underdog. He's likely going to lose this fight. I just think there's a chance he gets it done. I'm kind of going with the heart on this one instead of the head. So I'm going to go with Dominick Cruz to win this fight.
All right, so let's take it to Vegas and let's see what we're working with for this card. Of course, we are going to start in the world of underdogs. I will kind of read them out. We know that Jason Witt is an underdog. Priscila Cachoeira is an underdog. Blackshear versus Zalal. Tyson Nam. Charlie Ontiveros. Lucas Brzeski versus Buday. Angela Hill is a pretty big underdog. Gerald Meerschaert's an underdog. Nina Nunes. Devin Clark. Yasmin Lucindo. Nate Landwehr. And Dom Cruz.
Okay. So I know I picked I think Priscila Cachoeira is definitely. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. I think Priscila Cachoeira can definitely pull it off. Jason Witt. These are my picks, but these are underdogs that I think are really live in their fights. Jason Witt, Priscila. I think those two are super live, as well as that's it, man. But I'm gonna go with Dominick Cruz as my underdog pick of the week.
All right, I'm gonna echo that. Dom Cruz is also my underdog pick again, especially for a main event. But I think again, you brought up a good sort of caution for how we're analyzing this fight. We don't want to turn anyone away from going with Vera if that is their gut pick. But kind of heart over head at this point, and thinking Dom Cruz has a legitimate shot as an underdog. And in terms of parlay or favorite picks, what are you taking a look at here?
Okay, so let's go parlay wise. I actually like. Listen, this is low level, man, but I like Martin Buday.
Yeah.
I like Bruno Silva. What does that pay?
Bruno Silva. Those two 1.36 each, so it would double up to a 1.86.
Okay, and throw in Lupita Godinez.
All right, so we have three fights: Martin Buday, Bruno Silva, Lupita Godinez. Those three fights would be a 2.39. That means that $100 will return 239, and for our bigger bettors, $250 will return 597. My picks look somewhat similar in that I also have Lupita Godinez. I also have Bruno Silva. But my third fight, rather than Martin Buday, my third fight is actually going to be the same odds. I'm looking at David Onama. So it's going to be the same payout. 2.39, $100 is going to return 239 for the bigger bettors. $250 is going to return 597. So we're gonna wrap up there. Definitely some options on this betting card. We want to hear from you in the comments. We want to know which fight you're feeling, which underdog you're feeling, which parlay you're feeling. Of course, any specific additional commentary that you're looking for, make that be known in the comments, and we're more than happy to have that conversation with you. But let's officially sign off here. UFC Fight Night, Marlon Vera versus Dominick Cruz. Make sure you subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. Make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video as well. Otherwise, it's been your full card prediction video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. He goes by Zahn, I go by Harris, and in our usual fashion, let's get this money.
Let's do it.